Hey everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Atomo, Friday, December 16th, 2022. This is going to be a gardening video. So I got something for you here just to get us started and talk about gardens.
Here, Bruges is a good example of the European garden. Yes, Europe is a garden. We have built a garden. Everything works. It's the best combination of political freedom, economic prosperity, and social cohesion that the humankind has been able to build. There's three things together. And here, Bruges is maybe the good representation of beautiful things, intellectual life, well-being. The rest of the world, and you know very well, Federica, is not exactly a garden. The rest of the world, most of the rest of the world is a jungle. And the jungle could invade the garden. And the gardeners should take care of it.
All right, so I'll stop him there. I'll put a link into this in the description for the video so you can listen to the full speech. But basically, this is Joseph Borrell, if I have that right. He's the head diplomat of the EU, and I'm not sure if he's elected. I don't think he's elected and appointed to the position. Maybe he's one of these technocratic EU people that are just brought in and put on the European Council, or I don't quite understand all the layers. My understanding of European Parliament and politics is the EU members that you elect don't really get to create the policy. I think they can put stuff up to the European Council, then the European Council has to rubber stamp it. And then there's like the European Commission or something like that. So to me, it seemed quite odd that you have basically a kind of a central governing group. And if you get it wrong, I guess they could not. I don't know. So anyhow, when it comes to the garden, what he's saying is the outside world is jungle, and the jungle can come in and it can invade the garden. One of the things with gardeners, and gardeners have tools. You got shovels, you got hose, and you got snipper things and knives, and they could chop pieces of the jungle away. So he talks about not putting up walls and keeping the garden protected. Now he talks about, well, you can't do that because the jungle will just come up and it'll come over the walls and it'll creep in. And he said you have to actually go out and basically manicure it. So he's giving you a metaphor for a type of colonialism, even a neo-colonialism. And when we saw during some previous election cycles in 2020 after the pandemic stuff went into play, then you saw these great reset, build back better, and in this these terms get bandied about, and the idea is to basically create more of this garden around the world, but not through just say, oh, here's the tools and here's how you can do it, kind of in a way, but also through quite an authoritarian clamp down on your rights and privileges. And so that we saw that through the trucker protests in Canada, for example, where you had a bunch of people saying, okay, like, no, let's stop all this. This is crazy. Just let's have a conversation and talk this through, because this is out of hand. And well, you saw what happens when you have a gardener in Justin Trudeau, who basically didn't even listen to him, and he went, took his tools, and then you heard him talk about tools. We got tools. And this was Chrystia Freeland in one of the speeches during, I think, the invocation of the Emergencies Act, is basically, yeah, if you're on the wrong side of our political ideology, we're going to take your bank account away. So another way of trimming back a jungle is taking away the nutrients that makes the jungle grow. So your personal money can be at risk. And talking about personal money and the garden and kicking back pieces of jungle back to the curb, when the special military operation Russia to Ukraine occurred, there was about 300 billion, I think, euros that Russia had in EU financial institutions that was seized. Now they're thinking about just, well, we're going to spend it the way we want to spend it. And the same thing in, if we don't look at the trucker protests in Canada, it's like, okay, the money that was um, found raised on GoFundMe was actually seized as well. So nobody had a right to this money. It was even in the inquiries that we've had, as the Emergency Act was launched, and we have these inquiries that come up after that, basically saying like these are just basic people providing money to a cause, and we have the legal right to protest here in Canada. Protests can be noisy, it can be disruptive, but it is a part of our legal framework, and it's actually enshrined in our code of and civil rights. We do have a right to, because we have an election cycle, we can only re-elect people every 4 to 5 years. Then there has to be a way for us to say, no, we don't like the way you're going, and protest it. So a lot of inquiry videos for the Emergencies Act are online. You can go look at a whole bunch of that stuff. Yeah. So another, let's pull up my screens again. Let's jump from this gentleman over to, yeah, let me go find that for you. Here's one here. Let's talk a little bit about Angela Merkel. Okay. So yeah, oh, look at that. Maybe I had high hopes for her, but then after some recent comments, I think that would have been more appropriate, having that muzzle. So what she's saying, and yeah, condemns Russian invasion, legacies come under scrutiny. So not much here I wanted to put forward. I know she's led, and here's the thing, saying she's led Germany for 16 years. Did a lot of work with Vladimir Putin. Some things to understand here is Vladimir Putin speaks perfect German. Uh, and if I flip over to, so let me just, sorry, get some controls out of the way and flip over to that one. Okay. Partners cheated in the past. So big evil Putin, Pooty Poot, bad guy, evil. Don't go and do military stuff against another country. Well, let's take a look at this a bit further, because here in 2014, 2015, so you had the Minsk agreements. The Minsk agreements were basically a way of, you know what, let's find a way to stop the fighting that was happening in the eastern parts of Ukraine. So after the Maidan Revolution 2014, Ukraine is basically of two peoples. Now they're all Slavic people, and this is kind of the Russian side. And I'd have to have Ukrainians jump in on this, but this is like a very contentious thing. Like the polarization is so far apart that it really is coming up to be an us and them solution. It's a balkanization of the country, because the wedge politics were used, because you have a group that are are very historical Russian. You have another group that's a little more leaning towards the European side, and there's a lot of history behind it, and I can't do it justice in a short type of video to go through all the nuances of, you know, from Tsarist Russia through Soviet Russia to now more of a federalist Russia, from the EU side having uh, bouts through its autocrats going into the the Yahtzees in World War II, and the things that they've done in putting Ukraine as one of those countries that were in that straddle between these two seemingly ideologies. And with the Maidan revolution and the break, like really to do a forced shift over to the West, well, that basically leaves your eastern part, who are more of the Russian descent, basically out with nothing. And then there was this slow clawback of things like the dual language within Ukraine. It's like we're no longer going to do Russian anymore. Most of the Ukrainians I know, they know Russian. They were taught Russian. Now that's probably all going to change now with the next generation. But there's I know a little bit of Russian myself, and I've taken it now. Speak it like, oh, you're speaking Russian. It's like, oh, okay. My ignorant me, um, not understanding all the Slavic languages, and really that Ukrainian language has some different words. Some are the same as Russian words, and some are different. So I can't speak in a Ukrainian vernacular. And then yeah. So as you have a group of people and you start to take away, you start to garden them into the way that you want them to be, they're not going to be happy. Okay, so in this article here, here's the big one here, and I'm taking a Reuters article here just so this is so we know we're kind of, I guess, as center as Reuters can be, even though they do have some biases. But here they said the Zeit magazine, they were talking with Angela Merkel, and the Minsk agreements have been an attempt to give Ukraine time to build up its defenses. And I see there's a little bit of editorial it kind of reminds me of Orwell 1984. Uh, there's a little bit of news speak going on here. Give Ukraine time to build up its defenses. What was happening is, let me stop this for a moment. There were trainings that were going on. Let me see if I can find. Oh, good. Oh, good. A CTV news article. So CTV is a normie news in Canada. Okay, so, and I got something. Okay, looks like this one came out in 2022. So let me get that one up for you. Okay, so CTV News, mounting evidence pointed to Canadian armed forces having trained members of Ukraine's military who are reported to be part of extremist Yahtzee groups. My addition there. Experts say Ottawa needs to strongly bolster its investigative and vetting of the soldier it trains in arms in the battle countries. Again, the gardeners are picking their tools. So what they did here is, even before the Trudeau regime coming into play, during, I believe, Harper Canada's as well. Yeah, so simply Centura has links to the far right Azov movement. So what was happening is they're bringing Ukrainian soldiers over from the far right groups. So they're using the far right groups within Ukraine to oppress the people out in the east, and this is what made Vladimir Putin quite upset. Is you have a Russian traditional people who are in Ukraine. I thought it was like Ukraine and Russia from some senses is like these are our brothers and sisters. Kiev is a place of the old Kiev Rus, I believe. Yeah, so Kiev is like the heartland of ancient Russia and the generation of Russia. So that's why this special military operation wasn't just go in and do like an American style shock and on, just obliterate everything. It's like no, they're trying to. This is where this is kind of a contentious thing that might come up. But Vladimir Putin's quite a moderate. Uh, you have to be careful for the ones that are behind him, the ones that he's keeping to heel right now, because Russia has its fair share of neocons, and we don't want them loose to exasperate the European and American neocons and get us down into a line of war. That will be very disastrous. Yeah, so this was going on. So after the Maidan, around 2014, 2015, then NATO countries like Canada started to train these military people and are building probably the best army in Europe in the Ukraine and putting that one kind of right beside Russia. And this is where Russia's getting no, no, no. This NATO encroachment just keeps happening. And now you're basically building up military units and training them to a point where then these military units can go into the eastern regions and destabilize the eastern regions within Ukraine. And then all kinds of things happen. So basically, you have you have okay. I think that's done with that article, and we're going to jump over to. Oh, I closed two tabs. Well, the other tab that I closed off there. Sorry, things were a little slow there. Putin went over to I think, an Asian conference, and I was taking a look through some of my notes here. He's basically saying there's a couple things that came up out of that conference. So let's look at the EAEU summit in Bishkek. Okay, so when Merkel basically said, "Yeah, this was our Minsk agreement was a delay tactic to arm the Ukraine for war." So basically, that that told Putin, or basically like when we look at when the Nord Stream pipeline was created, Putin needed a little bit of arm twisting, and Merkel was really good. In fact, that Putin understands German, has an affinity, always had an affinity to have Russia as a part of the EU. You know, like basically he wanted to be a part of the garden as well. And what a potentially great ally to have that has almost limitless cheap energy. But the Greens, because there's the crowd in Davos, such a wanted to, bringing Putin in is a different type of garden than the European garden. So we got a little bit of garden discrimination going on. And he's not of this garden, probably even, well, we're going to call you jungle. You're different enough to keep with the metaphor. And so they said no to Russia. As much as Putin tried to find a way to get Russia into any sort of federated EU agreement. And so what we're seeing here is now you get this kind of slap in the face where here's this person that you're trying to trust and and Angela Merkel and stepping carefully and then getting like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, or I got this, know what we're doing. And now he he's coming to his senses that he should have understood the duplicity sooner and should have attacked sooner, before Ukraine had even more defenses. So this is a concept of going first. And now there's no trust within the EU. So in the one article that summarizes a bit of the EAU summit is basically like, I'm not going to sell stuff to the EU anymore. There's a pivot Asia, and that should be obvious by now. Any research, any articles that take a look at is Russia does have enough gas to supply the entire world with its needs, and it's bringing more supply online, and they can do it very cheap. And because the greenies have it in their mind that, well, even gas, that's dirty, that creates greenhouse emissions. There's a point where we need additional research to understand, the amount of temperature increase that we're really going to get, that if we do keep natural gas as clean as we can and we have proper decarbonization and abatement programs to work with the emissions, and we reinvest some of the money into the plants that are taking in natural gas, burning it, and then basically capturing the carbon or doing things that we can to offset the carbon. I don't mean like carbon tax offsets, like actually building proper technology to abate the amount of carbon. And it's doable. And with the cheapness of the energy and the amount of uplift that you get for the density of gas energy into your industry, no, it's a plausible and doable thing. You don't need to go to windmills and solar panels, which there are articles out there that are effectively, like, cost way more in energy inputs to build those, and the outputs coming them through the effective life of those implements. So basically, what we're seeing is a potential. Well, now we're going to be going into the long war. This is not going to resolve itself quickly. Right? So with that, I'll show you something else here. Let's talk to our buddy Xi Jinping. And here's one where China to use Shanghai exchange for yuan energy deals in Gulf nation. This is big. This is enormous. These enormous things just kind of, when there's a big change in the world, sometimes those changes are just whispers. Okay. Understand what's happening here by China using the Shanghai exchange for energy deal with Gulf nations effectively ends the petrodollar. Emphasis. Petrodollar is done. That article was 8 days ago. Okay, so I'm playing last week or so. You can put on your calendar December 2022, the end of the petrodollar. Now, there's really no big fireworks, no big shebang or anything like that. It's not how these things work. These take time to run through the massive systems that we have. And it's not like, well, the end of the petrodollar, here's the end state, here's what's going to happen, the collapse of the United States as we know it. No, there are steps that are going to happen. There are still moves on the game board. When I talk in previous videos about the geopolitical game board, there's still moves to be had. Well, what are some potential moves that could happen? Given that we got the fall of FTX, we got the Federal Reserve raising rates, that Russia can provide very cheap energy. You have Janet Yellen talk about putting in oil caps at $60 a barrel. and you have pivot Saudi Arabia, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia saying, hey, you know what? Yeah, we're not going to go with the USA anymore. We're going to pivot over to OPEC. Now we've got OPEC Plus. You got different groups coming in, and you have Russia basically joining up with the OPEC folk. And where can they? So you just can't put a $60 price tag on oil and say that's that. There are contract markets, future markets. There's blending and mixing of not too much oil. Not all oil can be mixed. It's not all the same thing. You got Russian Urals, you got West Texas Intermediate, you got Brent. All of these are different. They're different chemical compositions of these oils, and so it's not just one oil to rule them all. You got the Libyan sweet crude that comes out, which is a class on its own. So you have these different types, and they require different refinery implements in order to process this stuff. So what you're seeing now is new financial architecture coming into play. Okay. And that opens the door to now the game board and the players are even. So you have to think about the game board I talked about before, and there's factions. Players can exit a faction and new players can enter the faction. That can create maybe bifurcations or changing of the factions. And factions don't necessarily follow political borders. So the USA is not just the USA. You talked about the faction of the New York banks. Now, who's to say, and okay, this is just conjecture, that who's to say that New York banks in Russia are not talking? They are. They still have to do trade. And they can always go into the back room and have their back office conversation, say, hey, that gardening thing that they're talking about? Well, how about we spray a little Roundup on that, eh? So let's spray a little Roundup on that because that garden's getting out of hand, and those gardeners are getting a little overzealous, and they're walking over into the boundaries of other areas and going chop, chop, chop. Oh, you ever see the Central African franc? Giorgio Maloney had that 3 years ago. It was interesting that video popped up and made its rounds a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and showing that, hey, look, French still have a colonial instrument that they're using that's pegged to the French franc, which is then pegged to the EU and the ECB. So congratulations, Western Africa and those countries that use that currency. You basically are locked into a particular system, and so you don't get the benefits of floating your currency over this other currency, where you could, if you need to print or you need to expand or contract your currency base to help develop and fund your natural resource development. You don't have that instrument. So food for thought. You have been indoctrinated into the garden. You can't be a jungle. And that's a way of doing it. Financial policy can take away your jungle abilities. Is there a potential for a black swan? So next thing we want to look at is Kristen Sinema, Arizona, I believe, senator, moved to become independent. So what was happening is it was going to be 51 Democrats to, I believe, 49 Republicans in the Senate, giving that simple majority over to the Democrats without needing the VP to be casting any tie-breaking votes. Because here's an interesting thought. You don't see Kamala Harris very much, do you? Where is Kamala Harris? Remember, where in the world is Carmen San Diego? I'm dating myself, a very old game. You had to solve mysteries, and the top um, thief. It's a pretty sophisticated gal named Carmen San Diego. Basically, steal objects of art, and is very, very, very good at what she does. And you have to basically take out all her minions to go after her and to bring her to justice. It's a clue-based game. And the thing is, well, where is she around the world? And you have to jump all around the world, find the clues, and figure out where to go next. And if you're too slow, then the thief gets away. I'm not saying that Kamal is on the run or anything, but it's just, what faction does she play for? Oh, she's a Democrat. Okay. But she's not getting any of the, she was put on the border SAR, and that was completely a fiasco. Uh, she didn't get on a plane and go to Taiwan. There was a Speaker of the House that went to Taiwan, not the VP. That's interesting. Is it because she says silly things when she does talk? Yeah, okay. Is that all of it? I don't know. So the thing I was thinking about is Kamala, is the way that she speaks because she has one mind, but then, they have to plant the mind virus and say, Kamala, you have to talk to these things. And she doesn't quite have it integrated into her mind. So when she tries to talk about it, she just gaffs. She gaffs quite a bit and says silly stuff. Because I'm trying to give her a benefit of the doubt. But the other part of it is, well, she got to her position because she's connected, knows how to work the political system, which requires some ability to strategize. You can't do that and be a complete buffoon. So she's got some system that works in order to get to where she is right now. And I think there's a bit of patronage, probably because we're in the third era of Obama through the Biden junta. And perhaps there was a place for her, but maybe something has changed and we don't see what's happening in the backroom conversations. And the fact that the setup and configuration of the Senate went 51-49 means that, okay, great. Now Kamala is not going to be able to, if she's not towing the line and was maybe in the back room beaking out saying, no, I got a different way that we're going to do this. No. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, we better make sure that in the midterms that we get a 51, but we don't have to rely on the VP's vote. Well, now Sienma goes over and becomes an I independent. Now it makes her kind of a kingmaker potentially, but some say well, she gets to keep her portfolios in committees. That's an interesting, like, no, she keeps her committees. Where did that tap on the shoulder come from? And who's not to say, Kamala, here's your new orders. Democrat in name only. You're a dino now. And here's what you're going to do. And there's basically maybe a palace coup occurring, because now Obama and the Davos wings are getting clipped. Not sure if with the petrodollar going the way it has, there's probably some groups in the United States, if they haven't woken up, are waking up now, realizing that, oh, the bigs that have run petroleum industries better get off their tookuses and realize that your days are numbered if this regime stays in play, because they're going to keep knocking it down. And they're going to knock down the New York banks. They're going to knock out all these big factions. And unless, with Elon jumping into Twitter and exposing these Twitter files, what else is out there? And who might be new allies in the geopolitical game board? We still got that big war in 2023. Don't want to see that get any worse, but that's an angle that these people can take is, well, if we can't pass $1 trillion spending bills to break down or get to the point where there's a default on the debt and whoever can restructure and rebuild first is going to come ahead and perhaps establish the new unipolar new world orders based of rules and compete against the compete against China because Davos, they're not China friendly. So Davos being King Chuck, Soros. Soros doesn't like China. He's lost a lot in his China investments. There's possibly there's a specific controlled demolition of his finances in China through the Evergrande and the because Soros is in the BlackRock and he also has I think Evergrande is that in China. It's a land development developer had massive credit problems in China. BlackRock is under credit stress now, especially with Fed rates rising. And these are a couple of cornerstones of Soros power. And if that gets knocked out, then that creates a void at the table for a different configuration. So this is what we're looking for. Longer video today. I'm going to start ending it now. Looking at a different configuration that might start to come to play. Federal Reserve, I suspect, is going to keep raising rates, not at the rate that they've been doing, but estimating here, again, no financial advice, but perhaps 6%, 7% terminal rate. They might say things or give you a sense that things are being dovish, but Powell does say there's work to be done. And the work to be done possibly could be is we're going to finally clip the wings of these gardeners and show that, we're going to give you American style garden. And that's going to be a lot better for the world going forward than what you turkeys are doing. So keep an eye on Kamala. Keep an eye on what's happening as people, those technocrats come out and talk a bit more about Putin, what's going on there. Keep an eye out on Xi Jinping and the financial architecture that they're building for a new energy trading sector that's not going to go through the Western trades anymore. A lot of changes coming up in 2023, but keep your ear to the rail.